The fourth game in the series, though not a direct continuation, Mass Effect Andromeda aims to set itself apart from its predecessors by removing gamers from the familiar and placing them in an entirely new setting with a whole new cast of characters, alien races, and a new main villain. So does Andromeda do enough to live up to the high standards of the original trilogy? Does it manage to capture that special Mass Effect element? Does it succeed in setting itself apart? Well, after playing over 100 hours, finally, here are my thoughts on the game. The story of Andromeda begins after a 600-year journey to the Andromeda Galaxy on board the human ark Hyperion. The story centers around the Ryder family. Gamers can choose to play as either a male Scott Ryder or female Sarah Ryder, who exist simultaneously in the world. Suffice it to say, due to certain circumstances at the start of the game, you find yourself thrust into the role of Pathfinder, tasked with finding a new home for humanity and saving the Andromeda Initiative, which has had some very major setbacks. Ryder soon discovers that the worlds expected to be paradises are instead wastelands, and that not all inhabitants of Andromeda are happy to see you, and thus begins our hero's journey. Now, as many of you know, Mass Effect is probably my all-time favourite video game franchise, so you can imagine how hard it was for me to put all of my thoughts into a concise review. When writing this, I thought about how I wanted to structure it, what were the important points that I wanted to make, and then it hit me in a simple question. What are the ingredients for a great BioWare RPG? That's easy. A great story, fun and interesting characters, beautiful and exotic worlds to explore, fun and engaging gameplay, and thoughtful and detailed RPG features. So let's look at each element in turn. I would rate the story of Mass Effect Andromeda as good. It definitely starts off slowly, and the opening missions have some pretty corny, cringeworthy dialogue, but it's worth sticking with it past the 10-hour mark. As the game opens up, the pacing of the story definitely improves. More interesting characters and new races are introduced, and the mysteries surrounding the Remnant Vaults are gradually revealed. The last few missions escalate quickly into one of the best finishing missions in a BioWare game since Mass Effect 2. While I found the ending of Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect 3 very disappointing, I didn't feel that way about Andromeda. It was nice to see BioWare flex its narrative muscles here, and the final race to Meridian definitely tugged at the old nostalgia heartstrings, taking me back to the final race to the Conduit in Mass Effect 1, or one of the best final missions in gaming history for me, Mass Effect 2's Suicide Mission. I really enjoyed the final mission, and not just because of some of the epic set pieces or a challenging boss fight, but because I felt that some of the choices and alliances I had made during the game actually had some bearing on the ending. All those friends and reluctant allies make an appearance in the final mission, fighting at your side, and I really loved seeing all these cameos. It was a clever move on BioWare's part, allowing me to relive some of my favourite moments in the game and to really feel like I'd gone on a journey with my Ryder, culminating in this epic moment. It was epic and emotional, and oh so BioWare. Some of my favourite missions in Andromeda were the fan favourite returning loyalty missions. Each mission felt different and unique. Some were darker and more serious in tone, others light-hearted and enjoyable moments between my Ryder and her crew. I enjoyed each mission, though I'd have to say my favourites were definitely Liam's, Giles and PB's loyalty missions. The two main issues I did have with the loyalty missions though were the pacing of them and the forever dreaded on hold notice. Each loyalty mission was split into 3 or 4 parts. The first 3 parts usually included some investigation and fetch quest style gameplay segments, which would result in your companion of choice inevitably putting the mission on hold until they had time to study the intel or reflect on your findings. Progressing the loyalty mission could only happen after you completed a certain number of quests or main story plot points. The results, this left the loyalty missions at times feeling disjointed as you struggled to remember where you were or what you had done previously. It became at best a bit confusing and at worst downright frustrating. The second gripe I had with the loyalty missions were that it never really felt that they had any real weight or consequence to them, other than learning more about your companions, improving your relationship with them, or gaining access to their final special move. I don't know whether I just missed this, but it didn't seem that there were any consequences for not carrying out these loyalty missions, like there had been in Mass Effect 2's suicide mission, and that was just a little bit disappointing. Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering why give the story only a good and not a great. As a huge fan of the series and having played the original trilogy through like 4 or 5 times, in comparison, the story in Andromeda is vastly inferior, and I think the reason for this is for those familiar to the series, it just feels too samey. For a game that's supposed to be about exploration and taking risks, the storytelling in Andromeda simply plays it too safe. It touches upon themes and issues that have already been explored. To give you a general idea of the themes without spoiling too much of the story, we have the unsuspecting human hero that's special and unique in their sole ability to interact with ancient and mysterious technology. We have the continual struggle between human and AI, and finally the main villains who see themselves as genetically superior to all living beings and seek to eradicate and improve all lower life forms. Now, I might be unfairly harsh and critical here. Remember, I am comparing a single game with a trilogy, which in itself is an unfair comparison to make, and who knows, maybe the story will develop and improve in potential sequels and DLC content, though this seems to be on hold for the foreseeable future while BioWare works on its new IP, Anthem. But still, there are a lot of unanswered questions at the end of Mass Effect Andromeda and a lot of future potential for the series. If you ask any fan of the original series what made it so great and special, the majority would say the characters. The same can be said of Andromeda. Besides the fantastic gameplay, which I'll get to later in this video, the different characters in Andromeda are probably its second strongest point. Let's begin by looking at our main protagonists, Scott and Sarah Ryder. I did find both to be very likable and interesting characters. Uniquely, each have their own backstory and motivations before coming to Andromeda. Sarah is your quintessential explorer and scientist, interested in ancient races and technology, having spent much of her career studying the Protheans. Scott, on the other hand, is your typical soldier type, young, ambitious, and forever dreaming of adventure past the next mass relay. The problem with this is that they already feel like very set characters when you start the game, rather than ones that you have created yourself. Sarah, canonically speaking, is the most level-headed and logical of the two, while Scott reacts more with his guts and emotions. I felt like I was playing Sarah Ryder rather than playing as her, if that makes any sense. And in this way, those that have played the original trilogy may find the main protagonist lacking. Of course, this is an RPG, and like previous BioWare games, you can design and customize your own look. Though on release, the choices available to you were extremely limited to 10 set facial templates that you could tweak, each of which left a lot to be desired. In addition, the more black and white Paragon and Renegade paths have been removed in favour of more subtle conversation trees. Those of you that have played Dragon Age Inquisition will be familiar with this, as it was effectively lifted from that game. Rather than having the good Paragon or bad Renegade or neutral responses, players can now choose to respond in 4 ways: emotional, logical, casual, and professional. The only problems with these is that they sometimes felt too samey and subtle and did not always convey what I wanted to say. Most of the time, I tended to play a fun, light-hearted, and wisecracking Sarah Ryder just because I found these responses to be the most enjoyable to watch and play. Happily, interrupt queues are back. Though not Paragon or Renegade, they now give you a more definite hint of what actions you will take. For example, shoot a particular person, or save, or side with someone. While I did enjoy the interruptions and was happy to see them return, I didn't think there were enough of them in the game, and I actually preferred the method used in the original trilogy, where you didn't really know what would happen, and feeling that anticipation when pressing that trigger button was sorely missed. Now that we've talked about our main protagonists, let's talk about our companions. In Andromeda, there are 10 main companions and multiple main NPC characters that Ryder meets during the story. I thought these characters were interesting and had good progression and character development. BioWare has always been good at writing interesting characters, and they haven't disappointed here. Just like in the previous games, I found the non-human characters to be far more interesting and likable. My favourite characters were especially PB, Jal, I really like the new Angaran race, Drac and Vetra, who tended to be my go-to squad mates. I loved the banter each companion had with Ryder and with each other. There were dynamic friendships and rivalries that made these characters feel real and relatable, and some of the best moments in the game included these personal moments. Of course, most of these characters are romanceable, and I'm happy to say that the awkward underwear love scenes are a thing of the past, as BioWare borrows heavily from the Witcher series. Some of the love scenes are definitely raunchier than we are used to, so if you blush easily, you might not want to play these scenes in front of your family, if you know what I mean. In my first playthrough, I romanced PB, and I really enjoyed her character development and romance, which I thought was written maturely and smartly. I won't go into too much detail on the main characters here, because I would hate to spoil the characters or their backstory for you, but I am definitely hoping for a sequel, and I hope that these characters will make a return, and that BioWare will continue to tell their story and develop their characters over multiple games. Aside from some awful facial animations forever immortalized in some hilarious online memes, the environments and level designs in Andromeda are truly breathtaking and visually stunning. There are 5 unique and fully explorable worlds, each with its own ecosystem, wildlife, vegetation, and environmental hazards. These are not just randomly generated worlds like in No Man's Sky, they feel lovingly crafted and vastly different. My 2 favourite worlds were definitely Haval, I just love the atmosphere and mystery, and Vold. What can I say? I have a thing for snow in video games. Each of these worlds can be explored either on foot or in the new and improved Mako, aka the Nomad. With its boost and jump, it handles better than Mass Effect 1's Mako and has armor that isn't paper thin like Mass Effect 2's Hammerhead. The Nomad can be used to traverse the huge open worlds and provides essential protection from the environmental hazards that plague each. Its shield, of course, will deplete over time, and it does require regular recharges at drop points, and some may find this a nice added challenge and a sense of danger to exploration, while others might find it unnecessary and frustrating. The Nomad can also be used to scan and mine essential resources needed for crafting new armor, weapons, and mods. It's a definite step up from the boring planet scanning of Mass Effect 2, and an element that is really enjoyable and rewarding. Another nice element of driving around in the Nomad, apart from enjoying the breathtaking views as you skip along the ground, is the party banter that being in the Nomad triggers. These conversations were often interesting and amusing and provided valuable insights into the history and relationships of your companions. So my advice would be to drive everywhere so as not to miss out on these golden moments. I know that many players going into Andromeda were hoping for large open worlds with lots of interesting content and stuff to do, and Andromeda definitely doesn't disappoint in this respect. There is a lot of content here, though not all of it is interesting rewarding or engaging. Apart from the main campaign, which takes roughly 25 to 30 hours to complete, there are heaps of optional side missions to tackle. They are split into various categories. The Andromeda initiative-based missions are the most interesting, and they often revolve around your companions or your role as Pathfinder, and tend to have the best NPCs with interesting and engaging storylines and gameplay segments. The task of rebuilding and making planets viable for colonization was a particularly rewarding one, as Ryder found his or herself dealing with threats to settlers, political unrest, making allies or enemies, and dealing with a multitude of dangerous wildlife and environmental hazards that plagued each world. In contrast, those side missions in the additional task section are mostly filler and provide little value. The game here reverts to boring fetch quests that are both mind-numbingly dull and frustrating, due in large part to all the planet hopping that is required, which brings me smoothly to another element of exploration that is slow and dull: galaxy exploration. Traveling between galaxies is not really something that you pilot or control, as many were perhaps hoping for. Instead, traveling triggers transitional animations, which at first are beautiful and exciting, but after the 15th or 20th animation become tedious and time-consuming. Padding the game out unnecessarily, these instances sadly damage the pacing of the game and break immersion. While this issue was resolved in later patches by introducing the ability to skip these animations, why this was not in the game from the beginning is beyond me. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room and the biggest issue with Andromeda on release: the terrible performance issues, frame rate drops, game-breaking glitches, and awful facial animations. Without a doubt, the game was released in an unfinished state, which, given the fact it had a 5-year development cycle, is kind of unforgivable. But the reactions to the game in the opening week were pretty visceral and a bit unfair, with some fans claiming that this was the worst game in the company's history and that the game was utter trash and unplayable. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, and while I was as disappointed as everyone else with the poor facial animations and frame rate drops, which really broke immersion and enjoyment for me on several occasions, and it's something that I did gripe to Dante about numerous times. Of course, I expected better from a BioWare game, but it didn't deserve the 2s and 3s out of 10s that the game was receiving on Metacritic. This was no Assassin's Creed Unity, which had some pretty game-breaking glitches. Mass Effect Andromeda, for the most part, is a good, solid game, though it does lack the polish that we would have liked. What's most baffling for me as a fan of BioWare, and knowing how story-driven their games are, is how little focus and attention to detail was given to facial animation. I would have thought that this would have been a crucial focal point, especially with the power of next-gen hardware. If the rumours and stories are to be believed, this may not be entirely BioWare's fault, as they were given a smaller budget of $40 million. In comparison to games like The Witcher 3, which cost $81 million, and Destiny, which cost $500 million, though to be frank, most of that was spent on advertising, this might seem like a small sum, although for you and me it's a very large amount of money. Still, Horizon Zero Dawn itself cost $47 million, and that is an amazingly beautiful game and an incredibly polished game as well. So perhaps then it's not about the money and it's more an issue with poor management, and reports seem to indicate that this may have been the case and that the animation team was constantly understaffed and underfunded. Whatever the cause, I hope that BioWare and EA will learn from their mistakes with Andromeda and seek to improve on them with further patches and on any future projects. The best part of Mass Effect Andromeda is definitely the gameplay, particularly combat and movement. With every iteration of Mass Effect, BioWare have improved on its overall combat mechanics, and I would say that Andromeda probably has the most enjoyable and accessible combat of any of the Mass Effect games, and it is not surprising given that this is the team that brought us the hugely popular and fun multiplayer in Mass Effect 3. It's clear that combat and gameplay gameplay was a priority for BioWare Montreal, and it has clearly paid off here. The combat feels familiar, fresh, and responsive, and that's mostly down to 3 major changes in the combat: the introduction of the jetpack, a non-stick cover system, and character profiles. The jetpack and non-stick cover system has had a huge impact on combat, making it more fluid and dynamic. Gone are the easily identifiable cover points and combat segments from Mass Effect 2 and 3, which often involved gamers hunkering down in cover and popping their head up occasionally to take pot shots at the enemy or throw out a power. Enemy AI in Andromeda, however, are far more aggressive and pushing your position quickly, forcing gamers to stay on the move constantly. The jetpack allows a real verticality to combat, allowing you to move swiftly to high ground for safety or to hover in the air as you shoot down at an enemy, making cover all but useless. Combining the jetpack with biotic moves like Charge and Nova also creates some pretty epic combat options. Finally, powers are back and cover the 3 main categories of biotic, soldier, and tech, but instead of choosing a set class at the beginning of the game, players can now freely choose between powers to create profiles. These profiles provide unique bonuses and can be entirely biotic or tech in nature, or players can choose to mix and match powers to suit the situation. For new and returning players, this allows them to experiment with different setups and provides more freedom and control over their combat experience. At any given moment, players can quickly access up to 3 powers by using shortcut keys, just like the multiplayer combat mechanics found in Mass Effect 3. This keeps combat fast and fluid, the effect being that it's very rare for gamers to pause the action and access the tactic screen. The only reason to do this would be to use a consumable or swap between profiles. While sometimes this is necessary, it does carry a penalty as your powers must recharge before being able to use them again. All this means that the tactical nature of combat is a thing of the past. Now, some may like this change, but as a hardcore RPG gamer, I actually found myself on occasion missing the 8 or 10 abilities that I had on hand, and my ability to pause the action, survey my enemies, identify their weaknesses, and set up combos before resuming the action and watching the effects unfold. This can also be felt in controlling your companions. You can still give commands to your squad mates like fall back or take position or attack a particular target, but you no longer have control over their moves and commands, and this meant that it was often difficult for me to use them to set up or detonate combos. I found myself missing the tactical element in controlling my squad mates, and it seemed like a strange decision for BioWare to remove this ability, which was so central to the trilogy. Thankfully though, the squadmate AI is pretty good and they do provide support where needed. One of the biggest criticisms of the original trilogy was that with each game the focus steered more towards action and away from the RPG elements that we all loved in the first Mass Effect. Well, I'm happy to say that in Mass Effect Andromeda, RPG elements are back in full force in the form of customization and crafting. One of the best elements of Dragon Age Inquisition was the weapon and armor crafting and customization, and it seems that this has been lifted directly into Andromeda. Crafting and customization in Andromeda is robust and fun to use. As you find blueprints in the world and collect resources using the Nomad and exploring in the Tempest, you can use these to craft some pretty epic looking armor and weapons, all of which have varying levels, stats, and features. I really enjoyed this dynamic of the game, especially weapon customization, using mods that allowed you to create some very unique weapons that could shoot exploding seeking grenades, or lightning that just stripped enemy shields like they were nothing. The only downside to crafting was that it made merchants effectively pointless, as I often found myself not buying anything except mods or customizable color sets for my Nomad. I don't think I bought a single piece of armor or weapon in the whole game, and that is a huge oversight on BioWare's part. So overall, I would say that Mass Effect Andromeda is a good game. It's not a great game, and it's certainly not potential game of the year like we were expecting. It definitely doesn't live up to all the hype and the high expectations that gamers have for a BioWare game, and I don't think it's as good as the original trilogy. It has many flaws in the form of a weaker main story, boring and repetitive side missions and glitches, and poor quality facial animations that spoil true immersion. But it's certainly not as bad as many fans would have you believe, and does have a lot going for it in the form of fun and engaging combat and RPG features. Its characters are very interesting, well written and likable. So overall, I would probably score Andromeda a 7 out of 10. Perhaps Andromeda was always doomed to fail, as it struggled with the inevitable comparisons that would be made to the original trilogy and the exacting standards that hardcore BioWare fans would have after a 5-year wait and the controversial ending of Mass Effect 3. In one word, I would say that Andromeda has potential. It has now created an interesting universe with engaging characters, and there are many unresolved storylines that I would like to see developed in a sequel, though I doubt we'll see one anytime soon, as BioWare now shift their focus to their new IP, Anthem. So there you have it. There is my review of Mass Effect Andromeda. I am so sorry guys that it has taken me literally weeks to get this review to you. It has definitely been a labor of love, but there it is finally. Those are my thoughts on the game. Let me know what you guys think of Mass Effect Andromeda if you have played it, and what score you would give it out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please of course hit the like button as always to show your support. Take care guys and girls, and as always, happy gaming.